children can learn to deal with ADHD, and you can apply behavioral interventions and really get sometimes permanent behavioral change. Medication's highly effective when used properly. I don't think it should be the first line of defense. I see nootropics as a first line of defense for people who have issues with focus.
How then do the products that you have created at Thesis, like how does it compare to just the way, the efficacy of like an Adderall? Hey, Dan, welcome to the show. I'm glad to have you here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really want to just first, before we get to all of the ins and the outs of what you guys are doing at Thesis, and my listeners know, like, I just nerd out on this stuff. I love the science, behind, all of these different types of products and supplements, and especially when it comes to cognitive health and cognitive performance. But before we get into Thesis, I also love sharing stories of inspiration on here. And I got to tell you, like your story is pretty inspirational. I mean, going from a high school dropout and homeless to 2 master's degrees, one at Yale. I would love for you to just share a little bit about your story and really what led you to developing your company Thesis.
Yeah. So, I've always struggled with focus. For as long as I can remember, I had difficulty in school. When I was 4 years old, I was actually expelled from preschool. I have no idea what a 4-year-old does to get expelled, but I managed to do it. When I was 6, I was formally diagnosed with ADHD, and they wanted to put me on Ritalin. It was the late 80s, so that was the beginning of the Ritalin and then later Adderall epidemic. And my mom at the time didn't know a lot about ADHD, and it was still relatively new, so she was hesitant to put me on medication. She said no to the doctor, and I ended up going untreated. So I continued to have difficulty throughout school. I was constantly in the principal's office, getting suspended. And then when I was 16, I was failing most of my classes. I ended up dropping out of high school. It was a really difficult time in my life. I remember watching my friends graduate high school, go off to college, and I was still working minimum wage jobs, waiting tables. And, I got a lucky break. I ended up becoming a chef. I never went to culinary school. It was literally, I saw one of my customers at a restaurant that I was working at was a chef and struck up a conversation with him, and he placed a bet on me and trained me to be a chef. As a chef, it was the first time that I really experienced success. And coming from my, school, I came away from that experience thinking I was stupid, thinking I was lazy, not understanding why things were so much more difficult for me than other people. Being in the kitchen, it flipped. It was easy for me. I was passionate about it. I loved what I did, and I excelled so much more than my peers. And before I knew it, I kept getting promoted. I was traveling around the world, cooking at some incredible restaurants. I ended up working in a Michelin 3-star restaurant in France, where I eventually earned the title of saucier. It was kind of like the highlight of my career. And it was also one of the most painful times in my life. It was just a brutal work environment. There was no room for any life outside of work. It was just complete dedication to cooking. And I started to burn out then. When I really burnt out was my next role after that, where I was an executive sous chef on board a cruise ship. And the hours just grind you down. It would be 6 months without a day off, just 6 months straight of cooking every day. And it took something that I really loved and was passionate about and just made it into a living hell. So as I was starting to burn out, I was looking for anything that I could do that was different. I wanted to transition to a different career, different field. But at that point, I had no high school diploma, no college degree, never took the SATs, never even went to culinary school. So it was really difficult to transition to anything else besides what I was doing. And I got in my head that going back to school would be a potential way to transform my career. So I decided on an MBA. That's what I really wanted to do. I didn't want to go back and get an undergrad because I was already making pretty good money, and it just didn't make sense for me to go all the way back. So the obstacle in my way to getting into a good MBA program was the GMAT, the entrance exam. I
Mm-hmm.
got a GMAT study guide. I started studying, and it felt like I was back in high school. I would read a page, you know, 5 times. I couldn't internalize the information. I wasn't making progress on any of the practice tests. So, in desperation, I tried anything that I thought could help me focus. And, this was more than 10 years ago. I was on these study forums with other people trying to improve their study habits. At the time, I was trying ice baths, different workout routines, fasting, ketosis, meditation, and I came across nootropics. Nootropics were basically unheard of back then. And I went out and just bought everything I could find. So, products off the shelf, I bought things on Amazon, I ordered exotic ingredients from Mexico and Russia, and I started taking them and measuring my performance. And it was a really methodical approach. I would take something, I would study, I would see, am I able to focus longer? Most of the ingredients did nothing, but a couple of them worked. And when I figured out how to combine them into a winning formula, the results were life-changing. So when I went in to take the GMAT, I ended up scoring in the 99th percentile, which surprised the hell out of me. That's basically off the charts. And it was much more than I had ever hoped to achieve. That score opened up the ability to go to INSEAD, which is where I did my MBA. It's a top international school. From there, I was offered the opportunity to do another master's degree at Yale, where I got to study some of the science behind why nootropics were so impactful for my brain. And that's really, nootropics was just always a hobby at that point. They were so impactful for me that I wanted everyone I knew to take them. I was giving them to my mom, to my family, to my friends. I was the crazy guy at dinner parties that just wouldn't shut up about nootropics. And the first realization I had was the ingredients that worked for me didn't work for everyone.
Mm.
So I took, our first product was basically taking that iterative process that I used to find my formula, which took me 6 months and thousands of dollars and countless hours reading about the ingredients. And we compressed that down into a process that was structured where a customer could find the right ingredients for their unique brain chemistry in less than a month for less than $100. And I started the company in my apartment. It just kind of took off from there.
I love that. I love these the hair. Like I'm just gonna take what your like hard work and dedication, like you said, like months and months and thousands of dollars and all the hours of research, and you basically just are giving us the cliff notes, which I absolutely love, and I definitely want to get into all the different products that you guys have at Thesis and dive a little bit more into the science behind that. But before we go there, I want to just pause for a minute because there are a lot of women or a lot of listeners who listen to this show who are moms of little boys and moms of teenagers. And, knowing now what you know about your just, your condition, I shouldn't say condition, but your diagnosis, right, with ADHD. Like what advice would you give a mom about how to really like what you needed back then?
So this is really difficult, and I think about it a lot. Because of what I do, I have a lot of friends and even business acquaintances that will pull me aside and say, hey, I have a child. This is what they're dealing with. Can you help? What would you suggest? First, I'm not a doctor, so nothing that I say is medical advice. And I also don't have children. Candidly, I'm getting married in 3 months, and, we're starting to talk about having children. And I was really scared because there's a strong genetic component to ADHD. There's also like the prevalence of diagnoses is just through the roof right now. And it's scary to think I just remember how much pain I went through struggling with this as a child, and that there's a high likelihood that my future children will go through something similar.
Mm.
So I don't have anything against medication. I think medication is highly effective when used properly. I also,
Mm.
and again, this is my opinion, I don't think it should be the first line of defense. So
Mm.
when people are diagnosed with ADHD, they put them through a bunch of questions, and if they are struggling to the point where they are diagnosed with ADHD, they usually, the go-to intervention is medication. Now they have a lot of drugs available, but most of them, the most effective ones are stimulants. So methylphenidate, which is Ritalin, lisdexamfetamine is Vyvanse, and Adderall, which is D-amphetamine. Where I think a lot of people get into trouble is the dose escalates over time.
Mm.
So in the lower dosage ranges, especially in children, there's a lot of evidence that shows children can learn to deal with ADHD, and you can apply behavioral interventions and really get sometimes permanent behavioral change. Where I see things go wrong is the dose starts escalating. Parents don't put time and effort into doing behavioral intervention. So everything from cutting screen time, getting to bed on time, instilling good study habits. And before you know it, another disorder shows up. And this is, the
Mm.
polypharm epidemic. It's incredibly sad, and I see it very often, especially in children. So after a couple of years of taking a stimulant, a child will have difficulty sleeping, or anxiety will show up, or depression. And then at that point, again, going back to a physician, they'll say, well, why don't we try this anti-anxiety or this sleeping medication? There's very little clinical evidence on what happens when you combine psychoactive medications. In my view, that should be done very rarely and
Mm.
as an absolute last resort. And unfortunately, it's just surprisingly common and getting more and more common. So yeah, that's kind of like there's no substitute for behavioral interventions, for really caring for your child and setting them up for success. I think it can be a slippery slope where medications can be extremely helpful when used properly, but if they're not properly monitored, it's really easy for them to get out of hand.
Well, so how then do the products that you have created at Thesis, like how does it compare to just the way, the efficacy of like an Adderall or, or like you mentioned, like kind of the problem with that is you have to increase the dosage over time with Adderall. Like, do you find some of the same things with the products with the nootropics as well? The nootropics, or is it a different, just because it affects your body different, do you not have those same risks, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, our products don't build tolerance in the same way that traditional stimulants do. The way that I see our products at maturity, so, one, I just want to start by saying our products don't treat any medical disorders. So I have ADHD. I take our products every day. Our products are not meant to treat ADHD. And just like Adderall, nootropics, so Adderall does not work for everyone. Some people get horrific side effects. Some people it's not effective. That's just the way psychoactive medication works. Anybody who's familiar with taking psychoactive medications, antidepressants, it's very similar. A doctor will prescribe something, see how a person's impacted. Is it effective? Are there side effects? And then they'll adjust and potentially switch to a different medication if needed. Nootropics are similar in that it's really about finding the right ingredients, and sometimes that process takes a little bit of time. The way that I look at it, I see nootropics as a first line of defense for people who have issues with focus. So right now, one of the big issues is people will go to a physician and they have one option, really, and it's stimulants. And I think that there needs to be more options and transparency around those options. The way that I would recommend, or that I would do it if it was my child, our products aren't meant for children, but somebody who I cared about who is an adult and can take this. If they have trouble focusing, they should try Thesis or try Nootropics. And it's going to work for some people. It's not going to work for everyone, but you have very little to lose. If it works, if you're a responder like me, that's it. That's a great solution. And you can get all of your needs met without having any of the downsides. For the people where it doesn't work or it isn't effective enough and they need to escalate to a stronger prescription medication, that's okay. We actually have a second product line, which we launched. It's called Stasis. Stasis is the first of its kind. So a lot of people who are taking stimulants, they come with trade-offs, jitters, crashes, trouble sleeping. Stimulants work primarily by increasing levels of dopamine and norepinephrine, which is responsible for that increase in motivation, focus, and energy that a lot of people will feel. There's tons of citations. There's strong evidence that shows that they increase levels of glucocorticoids, primarily cortisol, which sensitizes the body's natural stress response. That's why it can feel like people are under chronic stress if they're taking stimulants. Most stimulants increase levels of oxidative stress, which can damage the cells in the body. There's evidence that they can impact mitochondria. They can trigger apoptosis, which is cell death. And what we found is for people who are taking stimulants, if they supplement with a precision targeted formula that contains adaptogens to modulate levels of cortisol, antioxidants to fight free radicals and oxidative stress, they're going to feel better in the short term and the long run. So that's kind of like the two-pronged system that we have. No matter where you are in your journey, we have something to improve your quality of life.
Has the research that you guys have done, have you seen cases where where people are able to then go from being on Adderall and Stasis to be able to is the goal to work down? Obviously, you're not a physician. This isn't physician advice, but I'm just curious. And the people that you've worked with and taken the product, have they been able to go down to just taking the Thesis products?
So again, it's hard because this is bordering on. I'll tell you a story that really impacted me. I talk to countless customers, and I've talked to customers that are taking legally the highest that I've actually talked to, people who are taking 90 milligrams of Adderall a day, which is crazy to me. I've talked to people who started taking stimulants when they were 3 years old. I helped one, he wasn't a customer, but he called. I helped check one person into rehab because they obviously had a problem with stimulants. It's a very common thing for people to come to us and say, I want to stop taking stimulants. It's really having an impact on my life. How can you help me transition? And we would always say, you need to talk to a physician. When somebody's been on stimulants, depending on the dosage and the period of time, when they stop taking them, it's going to be painful because your body needs to adjust to having less dopamine and norepinephrine. And, under the care of a doctor, you can figure out how you can titrate down your dosage, how you can take breaks and different methods to successfully transitioning. So previously, we had a hard line that if anybody mentioned that they were trying to use our products to transition off of a stimulant, we would just say, no, don't do this. We would send them a refund.
Yeah.
We would say, you need to talk to your doctor. And I had this conversation with this one woman. And again, this is a subjective story. This is just one case.
Sure.
There's a very high failure rate of people who try to go off of stimulants. So I talked to her and I discouraged her. I said, don't do this. Go see a doctor. Don't take our product. It's not meant for that. You need to completely stop taking stimulants for a couple of months because she was on it for a while. And I sent her a refund. She called me back a month later and she said, Dan, I just want you to know I'm free of stimulants. I'm taking your products. I completely love it. And you shouldn't discourage people like that because I made it. And wow, I still discourage people. I do it a lot less. People can make their own decisions about their health. Our product is not meant for that use case, and people should see a doctor under supervision. But I'm not that hard line, like, here's a refund, don't purchase our product. I trust that people can make good decisions about their health, and we're not marketing it for that use case.
Well, I'm curious. I know you mentioned that your products at Thesis are not meant for children. Is that just because nootropics as a whole are not meant for children, or do you see the research? I mean, obviously it's difficult to test on children, so I'm just curious. Because what made me think about this is I think, okay, we talk about a first line of defense, and like you just said, you have customers that have been on stimulants since they were 3 years old, and if you're a mother or father of a child who's got ADHD, is that the only option? Is the stimulants, and then you've kind of now we've you maybe get them started so early. And so I was just curious, about nootropics in children.
So some ingredients, some nootropics are studied in children. None of our products are studied in children, and I hope one day that we will have both Stasis and Thesis products available to children. It just takes a lot more research, and in a developing brain, just a lot of the ingredients that we put in Thesis, we use the most powerful ingredients, and we would need to make significant adjustments to have that available for a child. But I do agree that just because most people start stimulants when they're children, both Thesis and Stasis should have products that are available to people under 18.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of these ingredients. I want to talk about, your different products, because you've got, as far as I know, you've got about the six main products, right? Clarity, motivation, energy, logic, creativity, and confidence. And I was most intrigued by that last one, confidence. I'm like, wait a minute, like how, like everybody wants confidence, right? Like to me, that doesn't have anything to do with focus. So I want to break these individual ones down, but you mentioned like some of the, use the strongest ingredients, and some of these ingredients, like when I got your product, when your team sent me some of these I was familiar with, right? Like some of the adaptogens, and we talked about ashwagandha and some of these other ones. Some of these though, I was like, I don't even have any idea what these are. So what are maybe some of these key ingredients? And I know it's a different combination, how you use them in each of the products, but maybe what are some of the key ingredients that you'd like to share with the listeners?
So each formula is mainly targeted to different neurotransmitter systems. And it does it through several mechanisms of action in each formula. But, going to confidence, which I have here, I take confidence when I do podcasts. I take confidence when I have to do public speaking. Even though I have a lot of practice with public speaking, sometimes I still get a little bit anxious and nervous ahead of time. And I feel that this just calms me down and makes me perform better. So we have ingredients like saffron and ashwagandha. Saffron targets serotonin. Ashwagandha is a very powerful adaptogen. We use Shodan ashwagandha, which is the highest standardized form of ashwagandha available. This is one of the key things about our ingredients. So ashwagandha, you can go to Whole Foods, CVS, it's just about everywhere. But what matters, there's something called withanolides, which is an active ingredient inside of ashwagandha. A way of looking at this would be in marijuana, you have THC. So the percentage of THC inside of the plant, or you find this with a lot of bioactives, determines how powerful it is. We use Shodan, which is standardized to 30% withanolides. Most ashwagandha is low single digits. So when you think about just the amount of the active inside, it has a huge difference. Same thing with saffron. We use a very powerful standardized blend. We also have more exotic ingredients like dihydrohinochiol. It is an ingredient that targets the GABA neurotransmitter system. It's found in magnolia bark and is a very powerful calming ingredient. And we also have Zembrin. Zembrin is a shrub found in South Africa. It is studied for its impact on serotonin and its ability to provide an uplift in mood. So it makes people more pro-social. So
So
each
how do
one,
you know? Yeah,
I was just
go
saying,
ahead.
like, it's all synergistic. We use high doses of select ingredients to target specific neurotransmitter systems so people can perform at their best.
And I know one of the great things that you guys have on your website is you guys have a really awesome like quiz that someone can take and be like, okay, because how do I know? Because how do you know which one's really? Because I'm like, I look at this list and I'm like, actually, I want all of these things. I want clarity, motivation, energy, logic, creativity, and confidence every single day, and so it can be a little bit overwhelming. So what does the quiz look like for listeners to hop on and take that?
The quiz takes 3 minutes and it essentially asks you a little bit about your lifestyle, a little bit about your goals, some of the struggles that you're dealing with, and then it compares your results to other people who are similar to you who have gone through the starter kit. So people who have tried multiple formulations, and it sees which ones have the highest probability of being effective for somebody like you. And it recommends that you start there and you try those blends. It's the more data that we have, the better our recommendations are. And right now they're very accurate, but it just keeps getting better the more people that we put through the quiz and the recommendation process. Essentially, everything that we're building is taking that trial and error process, the iterative approach that I use to find my formula, and making it easier and more approachable so that you don't have to be reading clinicals on PubMed all night and, ordering single ingredients and weighing out, in the early days, I used to have little vials of white powder and a milligram scale, and I would go into a coffee shop to study for the GMAT, and I would break out a scale and I would just weigh my nootropics. And
I'm like in New York. I'm like, if you were in New York or not, wherever you were, I'm sure you got some looks for that, right? Just vials of white powder, breaking it
ton,
out on the scale.
I mean, so all that we're doing is making that level of efficacy more approachable, making it so that people don't have to put in that much effort. And, to your point, people, the question I get asked like all the time is, why can't you just put everything in one pill? Why can't you just make something that works for everyone? I wish I could. If there was something that could optimize everything, I would do it. It would make my job a lot easier. I probably wouldn't have started the company because most of our competitors take that approach where it's just one pill to solve everything. The human brain just doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. And, if you look at medicine, even if you look at ADHD meds, there's, 20 different types out there that target different, that have different mechanisms of action, target different neurotransmitter systems. And it's really about finding the right one for your brain chemistry. And that's the essential thing that our company does. It helps people find the right ingredients faster than anything else that's out there.
So, what should somebody expect when taking your product, in comparison to a stimulant? Obviously, you can physically, I mean, it's like such a jolt when it hits, right? I mean, there is a definite from before and after. Like, is there such an intense before and after when taking your product, or is it a little bit more subtle? And maybe what are some of the things that someone could really look for to basically like know if it's working, right?
So it depends on the formula. This is energy formula.
Okay.
This has, all of our formulas have short and long-term effects. Energy is more skewed toward short-term effects, and it's also targeting dopamine and norepinephrine like a lot of the traditional stimulants. When I take a stimulant, I feel a strong surge of dopamine followed by a crash. And sometimes that dopamine surge allows me to be highly focused, and it's really effective in having me go through a lot of work, usually tedious, monotonous work that's very difficult for me. Sometimes I end up watching YouTube or doing something like reading Wikipedia. I go down these deep rabbit holes. So it's not perfect. When I take energy, I primarily take energy if I'm jet lagged, sleep deprived, struggling, or I just have a long day. So today, for example, I'm in back-to-backs until 9 p.m. tonight because I have a work dinner. I will take an energy in the afternoon today just to make it through because I didn't sleep well last night, and I know that I'm gonna kind of like hit a wall. I do feel the immediate effects of more energy, but more importantly, I noticed that, you know, if I didn't take an energy at about 2 in the afternoon, by 6 o'clock, I'm going to be dragging. I'm just going to be completely unproductive. At dinner, I'm going to be, not fun to be around. I notice the difference in how I would be without it and how I get to show up that I take it. So that's energy. Things like confidence. I notice that when I do public speaking, I still get nervous, so much less. So, I regularly speak at conferences, a couple hundred people. Before, I would have this feeling in my chest. Now it's maybe 10% of what it used to be. And I want to stress that it isn't just nootropics. Nootropics and healthy habits and behavioral interventions are what's doing this. So I did a lot of practice with public speaking. I worked with a coach. I meditate. There's a lot of different things that I layer on top of it. But I see nootropics as kind of like the cornerstone habit that anchors all of that.
So I'm curious, like for instance, going back to the energy one, right? So does your product energy, does it have like caffeine in it, like an actual stimulant?
It does have stimulants. All of our products are available with or without caffeine. So this is the caffeine-free energy. Even the ones that have caffeine, I personally, caffeine doesn't do too much to me. So most of the time I'll take caffeine-free. Caffeine, I think, is kind of like healthy for me, so I'll take it from time to time, and I drink coffee. But we give people the option to take it or not to take it. Energy also has other stimulants that are similar to caffeine and behave, so energy has theacrine, which is from tea leaves that it behaves very similar to caffeine. It also has dynamite from mango leaf and sabroxy from the Indian trumpet tree.
So are those ingredients though, like in the research with this product, are those ingredients though that have an effect on everybody, just like caffeine granted, the level of intensity with caffeine can vary from person to person, but for the most part, I think like caffeine has pretty much the same effect, relatively speaking, on most people. And so my question is like for instance, the caffeine-free version, if you don't feel that surge of like energy, or maybe a little bit of a dopamine increase for yourself, does it mean that maybe just with your brain chemistry, like that's just like that's not the perfect mix for you? Or does that make sense? Kind of what I'm asking. Like, does that mean that it's just that like the ingredients in there aren't going to naturally just give you energy? It's got to be the perfect fit of it working well with your brain and the ingredients that you're using, like that magic formula you spoke about.
Yes. So the short answer is yes. When somebody takes a starter kit, they get a week's supply of energy, and if it's recommended to them, it's not recommended to everyone. And the goal is by the end of that week, they'll know if it's a good fit for them or not. And they'll know that by taking it and just noticing how they feel. What I would say is with caffeine, there's a huge variance in response. So if you take 100 milligrams of caffeine, for me, I won't feel that. I just won't. I can take 100 milligrams. When you get to higher doses, around 300 milligrams, which I used to take before I go to the gym, things like that, I'll notice it. But other than that, it does basically nothing to me. I know people, they take a couple sips of coffee and they're shaking, they're jittery. It doesn't improve their performance, it just gives them anxiety. The majority of people will get some form of energy from it, but they're just from talking to people, there's this huge, huge variance. And it's like that with all nootropics. So there's no, They do have some genetic tests on caffeine metabolization, but really there's no blood test, genetic test, anything that I could give to you to know how you're going to respond to caffeine, to really accurately predict what dose and what's your response going to be. The best thing to do is give you a cup of coffee, ask you an hour later, how do you feel? And that's the same thing, more or less like the methodology behind our product.
Yeah, and I love that. And I know just from getting the starter kit that you guys sent, I mean, it was you guys are really intentional with telling people like, hey, let's just try one at a time and try. And I think that the kit, like each little box comes with, I think what, like 6 packets, right? I think it's six, maybe six. I can't remember,
Yeah.
5 or 6, something like that. Yeah. And then it's to try it every day, and just see. Now, do you recommend trying it at the same time every day, or what does that look like to kind of to figure out in the beginning stages of what works best?
In the first month is about really finding what works. We recommend the least amount of variance possible. So it's not always possible. Some people travel, life happens, but if possible, taking it at the same time every day, really paying attention to how you feel. And when you know something's working, we call it a tiny win. This could be everything from like taking energy and feeling a rush of energy. It could also mean taking clarity and, having that thing that you were procrastinating on just get done, even though you don't consciously feel anything, or getting into a flow state. One of our board members, when he was trying it in the beginning, he noticed clarity when he was playing tennis. He just said everything kind of like clicked and he entered this state where he was just so focused on the ball. That's a completely different type of focus, but he was like, I just knew that it was clarity, and that's what he takes now.
I am curious. I feel like some of the ones are self-explanatory, unless there's some that you want to highlight. But logic does that blend really focus on regulating your nervous system just a little bit better? Or what is logic about?
Logic is primarily focused on memory. So
Okay.
what's the way that the names came about in the beginning, all formulas were just numbers. And we had a high level of personalization and customization, down to like the individual. And we were constantly iterating and testing different ingredients and different combinations of ingredients. After 2,500 people went through this system, we looked at the data and people would give detailed reviews on the formulas, and we used that review information to help them find which one worked. And, Formula 7, people are saying that this helps them with focus. So that became clarity. Formula 12 was, people are saying they're more productive and more motivated, and that became motivation. Kind of like the core ingredients went to that. And so that's how we put names. It was the clients that really named the formulas.
Got it. Got it. But so the logic came up for me because I was like, what I thought of as I was like, oh, I wonder if that's because like when I get like just super dysregulated and pissed off, this will help me to like just be a little bit more, logical. So thank you for clarifying that. Well, speaking of testing, I know, and I saw on your website, you guys, and this is really, really important, to share with the listeners about your process for testing and your rigorous process for testing. Because I think this is really what, makes you guys stand out with a lot of these different supplement companies that are really cutting corners when it comes to testing. So can you just briefly share with the listeners what kind of testing you guys do on your products?
Yeah. So the FDA does not test supplements. There's very little regulation in the space, and I think that needs to change, especially around supply chain and testing. So we third-party lab test every ingredient in every batch. It's not required. When you purchase an ingredient from a manufacturer or distributor, they give you a lab test certifying what it is. We say, great, but we want our own lab test and we want to sample it. So when it arrives at our encapsulation facility, we sample that and we take it to a lab. And we perform testing not only for identification, but for potency. So what percentage of the active ingredient is in there? If it doesn't pass that test, we send it back. We don't use it. This costs us tens of thousands of dollars a year. It's not required. That's why most people don't do it. But every once in a while, an ingredient won't pass. And so if we didn't do this, we would be passing that along to our customers. I take the product, my family takes the product, everyone at the office takes the product. I feel very strongly that one, you should know what you're putting in your body and it should be tested so you really can verify this is exactly what I'm putting in. You know that it's safe. You know how many milligrams are in there. And unfortunately, very few supplement companies do that. There are other ones. We're not the only one, but very few do it. And we make this public. So if you want to see the test, you want to see which lab we sent it to, which technician signed it, on what date, in what batch, there's zero secrets. Message us. We're happy to share that information with you.
Yeah, I love that transparency. It's like, it's such a huge, huge issue in the supplement world. And I think it's my mission that people understand how important it is to just purchase quality supplements. So thank you, Dan, so much for just being here and sharing just your expertise and really, diving deep into, I think, just this really this topic that just not a lot of people, I think, are really know about. And it's really, I love sharing with the listeners just alternatives to some of these medications that can be really, really difficult to get off of and can start off by helping people and then eventually turn into being pretty detrimental to someone's life. I've got friends who I've seen who have been on Adderall since they were, like you said, 3 years old, and now they're 40 years old and they can't get off it. And it is a problem. So where can the listeners just go to find out more about your product, to take that quiz, and to get that starter pack?
So Thesis, the URL is takethesis.com. Anyone can go there. It has all of our products. You can take a quiz. We have coaches on staff. So if you have any questions, you can reach out, and we're very responsive. Some of the coaches are naturopathic physicians. We have nutritionists, and it's free. So I would encourage people to leverage that. The second product line that I mentioned, Thesis, is on the website, takestasis.com. And that's for people who are currently taking a stimulant and plan on continuing to take the stimulant. It helps to mitigate some of the downsides so people don't have to sacrifice so much quality of life.
Awesome. Well, I will have all of that in the show notes. And thank you again for being here. And I'm so excited to share this with the listeners.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.